Mr. Chairman, staff is ready. You may begin.
Okay, it's 2:30 p.m. I'm sorry, on Monday, September 28th. I call the September 28th meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals to order. Teresa, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay. We begin all our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. I've supplied the flag, so please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Teresa, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Johnson?
Present.
Mr. Walzak?
Present.
Mr. Cotrier?
Present.
Ms. Bryson?
Present.
Mr. White?
Present.
Ms. Loudermilk? Ms. Loudermilk, you appear to be muted on your end. Mr. Chairman, we could circle back to Lisa. She may be having, oh, I see
I
she's
think I got it. Present.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good.
Ms. Loudermilk. Dr. Ponder?
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a full quorum of board members today. Thank you all for taking time to participate. I want to welcome any visitors on. We have Councilman Glenn Stanford, I noted, visiting with us today. Welcome, Councilman Stanford. In terms of the procedure we're going to follow today, this is a continuation primarily of a hearing that was postponed at the last meeting. And so I've consulted with staff and we've determined that we do not need to hold a complete new hearing with testimony from both staff and the applicant. There'll be some questions at the beginning. We'll ask for an update on where things stand, and then we'll have a discussion of the merits of the application, and the board can move to making a determination. Next item on the agenda is, in fact, approval of the agenda. And I would like to entertain a motion that we add under new business for this agenda a discussion of our October 2020 agenda. Could I have a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would so move with the following addition, that we add a status report from the staff on our request for LMO amendments. We asked about that at our July meeting, and that was based on actions that we took at our January and our July meetings. So I would move to amend the agenda with those two additions.
Okay, thank you. We have a second.
Second.
Who's that, Mr. Johnson? I'm sorry, who made the second?
Bob Johnson.
Okay. I'd like to ask each of you, if you make a motion or second, before you do that, just say your name so we're clear. So we have a motion and a second before the board to amend today's agenda to include under new business a discussion of the October board agenda and a report on the status of LMO amendment. Any discussion regarding that motion? Hearing none. Teresa, would you call the roll?
Mr. Johnson?
In favor of the motion.
Mr. Walzak?
Oh, present.
I'm in favor of the motion.
Mr. Cotrier?
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson?
For the motion.
Mr. White?
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk?
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder?
For the motion.
Okay, on a vote of 7-0, the agenda has been modified to add some new business items. Now we'll have a motion, or Chair will entertain a motion to approve the amended agenda. Someone care to make that motion?
Bryson makes the motion.
Bryson for the motion. Do we have a second?
Ponder,
White.
second.
I see Mr. White seconding the motion. Any discussion? Hearing none. Teresa, would you call the roll?
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
I'm in favor of the motion.
Mr. Cotrier,
For the motion.
Miss Bryson,
For the motion.
Mr. White,
For the motion.
Miss Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder.
For the motion.
Thank you. By unanimous vote, the agenda for today's meeting has been amended. Let's see. We're through that. Next item is consideration of approval of the minutes of the August 31 meeting. Do any of the board members have any changes or items to correct in connection with those minutes that were previously circulated?
Walzak moves to approve those minutes.
Mr. Walzak's moved to approve the minutes as written. Do we have a second?
Bryson will second.
Bryson seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Teresa, would you call the roll?
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
I'm in favor of the motion.
Mr. Cotrier,
For the motion.
Miss Bryson,
For the motion.
Mr. White,
For the motion.
Miss Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder.
For the motion.
Okay, by unanimous vote, the minutes of the August 31 meeting have been approved as written. We'll move on now to citizen comments, and I'd like to ask the board members if you would mute yourself except when you're going to speak. Maybe that will cut down on some of the background noise. Teresa, could you update us on citizen comments, please?
Certainly. The public hearing for today's variance request was opened and closed during the BZA's August meeting. However, staff opened it up to public comments on the town's online web portal. Those comments were provided to the BZA for review and made part of the official record. Citizens could also give comments during the meeting by phone. However, there were no requests to comment by phone.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to unfinished business, which is a continuation of the consideration for variance 001461-2020, a request from Michael Liker for a variance from LMO section 16.3106H4B, Forest Beach Neighborhood Overlay, for a proposed driveway to be built parallel to the adjacent use buffer and exceeding the 24-foot width minimum. That's a lot to say. Property address is 3 Alder Lane. What we'll do again is I'll ask staff for an update. Mr. Liker will have a chance to give an update. I have a question I want to address to Stephen Ryan, our staff attorney, and then we'll go into board. Sorry. Then we'll go into a discussion with the board and a decision on this application. So, Missy Lewick, could you please give us an update on this variance as you understand it from the town's perspective?
Yes, I can. Missy Lewick, Senior Planner, for the record. This is a request.
Somebody's
Again,
persistent.
okay. This is a request that, again, we heard last month, and it is to seek a variance from the adjacent use buffer for a driveway that's built parallel within the buffer and a driveway that exceeds the 24-foot width maximum. I'm going to share my screen and let me know if you can see it. Can you see the
It's
screen now?
visible.
Okay.
Yes, it's
So to familiarize you with, how do I move that? To familiarize you with where we left off, I amended the drawing again just for some clarity, and I'll explain. The red dashed outline is the property dimension or the setbacks and buffers. The purple corners are the property corners. The hot pink is the driveway, proposed driveway outline. The yellow highlighted area is the area of the variance request. And then over to the right, the green is the wall that we're talking about. And you can see where the wall has the break in it, where the existing curb cut is, where they're intending to seek the variance to utilize that existing opening within the wall. So we left off our last meeting with the board postponing a decision or tabling the discussion and to reconvene at our next regular meeting to continue the discussion. I reached out to the applicant who has indicated the Marriott has given some verbal updates, but nothing yet in writing on the decision that they have regarding the wall. And really that's as much information that I have. And just to bring it back up to speed with where we left off, if you don't have any questions for me, I'd like to turn it over to the applicant to see if he has any additional information he'd like to share.
well, before we finish with you, could you explain to us again, from your perspective, Missy, the yellow shaded area, uh, why that variance is needed there, or what causes the encroachment?
Well, currently the driveway, the way it's coming in, and the way that the house design is, it's necessitating the driveway to come in through the existing opening where the wall has a break in it, and then it runs parallel within the buffer, again outside the red dashed line in the buffer, and driveways cannot run parallel within the buffer per the ordinance. And then because there's the existing driveway width of 14 feet plus the 23-foot highlighted area, it exceeds 24 feet of driveway width within the buffer. And so those are the two reasons why a variance request is needed. And as we discussed previously, if the applicant was able to come in directly from Alder Lane and remove a portion of the wall, then and not do the driveway that is where my cursor is, and only come in directly, then there would not be a variance that would be necessary. So,
Okay, thank you. And just so we're all clear, Alder Lane itself, which provides the vehicular access to the property, is on the right-hand side of the green wall as it's shown in this drawing, correct?
that's correct. Alder Lane, which is on this drawing, is a 50-foot right-of-way, but there is a pathway that is in that right-of-way currently, and Alder Lane itself is a drive aisle that's part of the Marriott development.
Okay, and the gray shaded area is the walkway?
Yes, that is a pathway.
Okay. Do any of the board members have a question for Ms. Lewick?
Yes, sir, I do. This is Ms. Bryson.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the increased visuals on the plan that you have done. I can't quite read, what is the existing curb cut in two locations? One is on the applicant's property. There's an existing part of a driveway or an old driveway. What is the width there? And then what is the width of the opening at the curb cut on the Marriott side? That's the first set of questions.
The driveway width that's labeled on the plan is 14 feet wide, is what they propose the driveway would be as it crosses the pathway. I don't see a dimension of, of it as it meets Alder Lane Drive aisle. I don't see that dimension.
Okay. Um, and and I think we had some previous testimony about the use of Alder Lane. And it's my understanding that that's part of the multi-use pathway system. Does the town have safety concerns about the variance being granted to allow a wider access across that multi-use pathway?
No, we do not.
Okay. And I think, Mr. Chair, the next question I have probably would be directed maybe towards Mr. Ryan and Ms. Lewick and whoever else on staff is available. I'd asked some legal questions about the
Okay.
status, the legal status of Alder Lane, and then also what curb cut, if any, access was approved as part of the conditional approval for the Marriott plan. I believe, according to our minutes, was in the 1990s. So I'm not sure who of staff could respond to that, but I have not heard an update to that.
Okay, we'll hold that. Would you, I'm making a note here, Ms. Bryson, could you restate your last item? You
Sure.
wanted legal status of Alder Lane and
And also the curb cut access, if any, that was approved for this property, the applicant's property, when the Marriott conditional approval was made in the 1990s. And the staff was going to try to research that more, and I haven't heard an update about that.
okay. Ms. Lewick, do you have any response to the second question about the curb cut?
Alder Lane is a drive aisle as part of the Marriott's development. As part of that conditional approval, there, from what I understand, there weren't specifics to site access specifically for this property. But it was included. There were, what I believe, 2 or 3 properties that Ms. Lewis identified that were part of that conditional use permit for the Marriott development. And this property was included, but it didn't have specifics from what I understand.
So at the last meeting, I know there was some, I understood perhaps a map was going to be available, or the staff was going to do some more research back in the records at our last meeting. I listened to the video of the meeting to find out what our remaining questions were. And understand so that staff was going to do some more research. Has staff done more research and looked back at the records from the 1990s to be able to address those questions?
The records were looked into, but there was no additional information that we found that we can report out.
So, is there anything in the records that says that there was actual access allowed for this property?
Can you hold on 1 second?
Sure.
The documentation that was found did indicate that 2 or 3 residential parcels were included within the Marriott's development, but it didn't have specifics as to how wide their drive aisles would be or their driveways and the access.
And you say that 2 or 3 residential lots were included. Did it include a map showing where those lots are located, or naming them, or legally describing them?
Sorry, I'm just getting the information.
Sure.
It did include 3 residential parcels and their tax ID numbers, but it did not include a map.
And has the staff confirmed that any of those tax ID numbers belong to this particular lot?
Yes.
Okay. And which other lots were included? Are they all along this Alder Lane drive aisle?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And do we know if, I understood the testimony from last time to be the lots with addresses, if you will, 3, 4, and 5 Alder Lane. Are those indeed the 2 to 3 lots?
Can you hold 1 second?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Johnson.
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
I believe if the staff would look back at last meeting's documentation, there was actually a map in there showing all 3 of these lots, and it was pretty clear that they all required access from that Alder Lane.
Okay.
That may be what they're searching for.
Okay.
We are pulling up a map of the area at the moment, so just sit tight a minute.
I guess I need to ask, how is the access to other lots potentially, the potential access to other lots, germane to the discussion or the consideration of this particular variance? Can you enlighten us on that, Ms. Bryson?
Sure. There were questions and testimony about access to other lots, and the staff presented draft findings about a variance, which included reference to whether or not there's a similar condition to other lots in the area. So that's why it's absolutely germane.
Okay.
So I'm seeing a nice map, and I'm sure the staff's going to tell us what this is showing.
Okay, so this is a map of the vicinity, and both 1 and 3 were the parcels that were included within the Marriott development.
Okay, and where is this map from? Is this the current map, or is this from the 1990s?
This is our current property viewer map.
Okay. All right. Any other information from Mr. Ryan about the legal status of Alder Lane?
I am on the GIS map as well, and the owner of the Alder Lane is the Marriott. It's a privately owned property, unless I'm mistaken.
Okay.
Nothing else to add.
Do we know whether or not the town has an easement across Alder Lane for the Maltese pathway?
I don't know that.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other questions for staff at this time? If not, then thank you, Missy and Stephen. We'll go now to Mr. Liker if you could give us an update on your situation.
Sure. I've been in contact with Massimo at the regional branch of the Marriott with a verbal approval that I'm going to get that. What is happening right now is the lawyers have to draw up paperwork, basically controlling the cutting of the wall. The Marriott's going to control that, and that's going to be billed to the Sabos, the owners of 3 Alder Lane. So basically, I'm awaiting for lawyers, which could be 2-3 months.
Okay.
So I'm just looking for the variance so I can just move forward to get plan review and get a building permit so that I can cut and fill the site and get prepped for once I get that easement from the Marriott.
So can you tell us what your understanding is, Mr. Liker, of what is needed in order for you to have a building permit? Let me back up. I assume you need a building permit before you can start site work.
That's correct.
And then,
that's the information I was given from the town.
Okay. And what are the conditions that you understand you would need to meet in order to get a building permit? Is it simply a decision on this variance?
That's correct.
Okay. And if you got the building permit, you would start with site preparation, and approximately how long would that take before you would begin what I would call actual construction?
I would imagine the actual vertical construction would probably be about 3 months out. I have to put everything out to rebid again, and it'd probably be a month to get a site contractor on site, and then it has to be loaded for 1 month prior to footings.
Okay. And I believe that there was testimony in the prior meeting that one alternative to this was to redesign the house or access to it. But that would, I believe your testimony was that was an expensive proposition for the owners.
Correct.
And that you, if I remember correctly, the owners had engaged an architect who had drawn up the plans, and you got involved in this sort of after the fact.
That's correct.
Okay.
This was actually the second redesign from the architect.
And do you have any sense of what kind of cost might be incurred by the owners if they redesign to meet the current conditions without a variance?
Well, I think it'd probably be about $30,000 for a redesign, or they would probably go into litigation with the architect for supplying a set of plans that are not buildable.
Okay. Are there any questions from board members for Mr. Liker?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have one. Walzak here.
Go ahead, Mr. Walzak.
Yeah, Mr. Liker, have you made application for a building permit yet with the town? I mean, a preliminary one. You don't need to have a builder, you can just put the plans in and get started.
The plans have been submitted for, this latest plan probably for 4 months, and I get the bounce back up there from Miss Horseman. So I don't think the plans, I don't know if they've even gone further past the desk to go through review. I'm not sure the status of them, to be honest with you.
Okay. You said the last time, because I asked the question, you have to surcharge the site. And you said that the building department wouldn't allow that. Why wouldn't you ask them for a variance to put the dirt on the site and surcharge it? What's the problem? Get a variance from them.
They never offer that as information.
But you didn't ask.
I didn't ask. How would I know? I've been in construction for 28 years. I've done everything from $500,000 projects to $100 million projects. Typically, it's a pretty easy process. You'd think that information would have been given.
Yeah, because you're really not. All you're doing is, putting dirt on the site. It's not like you're creating it. And if something goes wrong, you take the dirt away. It's not. It's not
right.
A big deal.
I asked the question, and the answer is I cannot do anything without a building permit. That is the response I got from Mrs. Horseman.
Yes,
haven't,
excuse me, Missy Lewick. A variance in the building permit process is not something that we have a process for.
okay. So that means because there's no process, it's impossible to do.
Mr. Walzak, Nicole Dixon for the record. I just wanted to mention that we cannot issue a building permit for, we cannot allow an applicant to fill a site without a building permit. That it's in the code. So you cannot place fill on a site. It's considered development, and you would need a permit for that.
Okay. Doesn't make sense to me, but okay.
Okay, any other
Mr. Chairman,
questions?
Mr. Chairman, Bob Johnson.
Wait just a minute. Mr. Walzak, are you done with your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Johnson? I'll go down the
Yes.
list.
I have a question, two questions. How come the house was not pushed all the way to the left-hand setback that we saw in the last drawing?
Right. I can't speak for the architect on that. I have no idea why the design was like that.
Okay.
So it's
My
hard for
second,
me to comment on that.
yeah, my second question is, if you were to get a variance contingent upon being approved, if you get to the point where you have to put the driveway in, can you give the board a guesstimate on how many months after you start the actual construction that you would have to put the driveway in? Isn't that fairly close to the end of the construction process?
I mean, it would be probably midpoint of the construction process. You know, I do have that curb cut for access to do the work currently. I know that it was a blessing that the Marriott called me 3 weeks ago and said, we're going to allow you to go through the wall. So now it's just the legal things of an attorney drawing up a letter, that being reviewed, and then the Marriott getting 3 competitive bids for that work to take place.
Yeah, thank you for that information, but that wasn't the question. The question is how many months to that midpoint? So the board has and most of them are not in the construction business. They might think it's a month.
I would say 5 months.
Okay, thank you very much.
5 to 6 months.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I'll follow that up with, so 5 or 6 months from the time that you bring the dirt in or you start the vertical construction?
I would say 5 to 6 months after I bring the dirt in.
Okay, so theoretically you have 6 months to get this letter from the lawyers, right?
I should have it well in advance of that, but yes, that would be a very safe assumption. I would hope to have that within 3 months.
That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll go down the list here. Ms. Bryson, questions?
Yes, sir. Mr. Liker, is that correct? The last name, the last name correct?
That is.
Thank you, sir. Do you have anything in writing from the Marriott except for a verbal conversation?
I do not. I've had numerous conversations with they actually reached out to me and said that they were going to grant the removal of the wall to meet the plan. And then I've had one other conversation with Massimo again to verify that. And so we're just waiting to get legal stuff drawn up for them to put out competitive bid that the owner can look at so that, you know, it's a fair price.
Right. Yeah. But there's no email, no text, nothing in writing.
There is not. And I could be more than happy to provide you with Massimo's phone number, and I'm sure he would verbally commit to that to you. And he is the local Marriott Grand Ocean that has been facilitating all the corporate stuff and making this happen.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. White, any questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Ms. Loudermilk, any questions? Ms. Loudermilk?
No questions. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. And Dr. Ponder, any questions?
No questions at this time, Mr. Chairman.
No questions. All right, thank you. Um, at this time, I'd like to call on Stephen Ryan, our staff attorney. And one of the things that has been discussed is a possible conditional variance, I guess we would call it, whereby the board might consider approving the variance subject to certain conditions of time and it's also my understanding, I'd like Mr. Ryan to confirm that if the Marriott granted this permission and in fact removed the wall so that a direct straight-in driveway could be built, that the variance would no longer be needed. So, Mr. Ryan, could you address us about the concept of a conditional variance?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Stephen Ryan, staff attorney for Town of Hilton Head. You have the ability to grant variances, and when you do that, if you elect to, you can also have conditions attached to them. That it's very common for irrigation of landscaping to have a conditional variance, for example, that once the sod takes hold, then the variance goes away and the irrigation equipment goes away, for example. So that is a tool available to you, but we would have to have enough specificity in what we do with this property if you're inclined to grant that variance so that both the applicant and staff can put it into practice and be able to articulate that it's being complied with or not complied with. What I'm hearing is probably the conditional event would that wall coming down, which would be a clear, bright line event that would be relatively easy to enforce, and that there wouldn't be too much ambiguity between staff and the applicant.
Okay, so under the theory that the board might approve this variance request, if we may, I guess I'm struggling to understand what good would be accomplished by a condition that approval from the Marriott had to be achieved or obtained within a certain period of time, because we've already established that if Marriott agrees and in fact the wall comes down, then the need for this variance goes away. So I guess I'm thinking that if the board were inclined to grant the variance, it ought to just do that with no condition, and time will tell whether that variance becomes necessary or not. Am I going in the right direction here, Mr. Ryan?
That sounds like the simplest and most practical way to address the issue, sir.
Okay. Any members of the board with questions for Mr. Ryan? We'll start. Dr. Ponder, do you have any? I see you shaking your head.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Ms. Loudermilk, any questions for Mr. Ryan?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Mr. White?
No questions at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Bryson?
Yes, sir, I do. Mr. Ryan, we heard testimony from Mr. Likert, which appears to be hearsay about whether or not the Marriott has approved. Under South Carolina law and Board of Zoning Appeals procedures and law, is it appropriate or not to consider such hearsay testimony about an important fact?
This is a quasi-judicial body, and you do have rules of evidence and procedure but it's his testimony that he secured that arrangement, that he's a party to, that he would have firsthand knowledge of it. So the weight that you put into it is as much as you feel comfortable putting the credibility of Mr. Laggert's testimony. So you certainly can, if you want to take it at face value and you're inclined to do so, you certainly may. Obviously, I wish we had the documentation in place, but Ms. Bryson, you're welcome to put as much weight into it as you feel comfortable.
And so there's no requirement in South Carolina that evidence to be considered appropriate be subject to cross-examination.
Excuse me, ma'am?
Yes, so where you have testimony that is verbal based on hearsay, you don't have the party who made the statement available, then that party is not subject to being cross-examined about the truth or non-truth of that fact. So, so it sounds as though we can decide whether or not to believe someone based on information told to him by another person. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Walzak, any questions from Mr.
Yes,
Lyon?
essentially, for all of us, really. Didn't we do that the last time we met, what you were talking about, Jerry? We basically said we would grant the variance as long as Marriott gives the written permission. So by doing a quasi temporary provisional,
call it a conditional,
all right, it's basically the same thing we did the last time. So I don't see the point of prolonging this to unless there's some legal reason to do it, but because that's what we did the last time, essentially.
Well, we didn't actually do anything the last time. We talked about doing different things, but we voted. What we did is we voted to postpone to this meeting. So we didn't do anything last time in terms of making a decision. We postponed it.
But based on the discussion, and I think what was in the minutes, we basically said we'd want to wait. We want to wait before we make a decision. So why would that change now?
Well, I think it would change now because of the testimony from the applicant here, Mr. Liker, who's representing, I guess, the applicant, that there is significant time delay being incurred while this decision is being contemplated, that he needs to come in and do his site prep work, get the dirt in, give it time to settle or be compacted or whatever one does. I'm a finance guy, not a builder. And he's told us that it would be, in his testimony today, up to 5 months before the driveway, I guess, would have to be staked out and built. So we could continue to postpone. We could simply deny, postpone, approve, whatever. But while this application stays in limbo, testimony from the town is no building permit is going to be issued until the decision's made, and until a building's permit, nothing can be done on the site. So it seems to me that continuing to postpone is imposing a hardship on the property owner, and in this case, the representative here, the builder. So if we could, I'd like to see us move to a decision today, one way or the other, but that's just my 2 cents worth.
Well, again, just to have a little discussion on this, isn't it really the Marriott that's causing the hardship?
Well, that depends, I guess, Mr. Walzak. Let's hold that discussion for a moment, because right now we're addressing any questions we have for Mr. Ryan's information.
Okay.
So you're done with any questions from Mr. Ryan. Okay. And last but not least, Mr. Johnson, any questions from Mr. Ryan?
I have no questions.
Okay. We've heard testimony from staff, from Mr. Liker. We've had questions back and forth, and then we've heard again today some updates. What we know is that as of today, there is no approval from Marriott other than one that's represented as oral, but Mr. Liker has indicated that he has some level of confidence that a written consent and, in fact, a removal will take place at some point in the future. But we've also heard testimony from Mr. Liker that delays are being incurred, and it seems to me we ought to try to move this along if we can. The decision that is before the board, and if I remember correctly, perhaps we should go back and look at it, but if I remember the staff's analysis correctly, 3 of the 4 conditions necessary for approving a variance were the staff reported in their estimation as having been met, and only 1 was not. And I believe that was the one that says that this was a unique situation. So the decision that the board can make today, if it chooses to make one, is to either deny the variance, approve the variance, or approve with some certain conditions. Our procedures clearly give us the right to impose conditions or other matters, or postpone for another meeting. I guess I'd like to have some discussion among the board as to if there is sentiment to grant the variance, what, if anything, is accomplished by setting conditions such as a time by which this must be met. My looking at this leads me to believe that we ought to either approve or deny the variance. And if we approve it, Mr. Liker could get started, the Sabos could get their home under construction, and if Marriott comes through and at a later date takes down that portion of the wall, gives them direct access or driveway, then the variance isn't needed. If that never happens, then the house can be built and life goes on. So, Mr. Liker? Yes, Mr. Liker?
Yes. I guarantee you that they're going to get the access straight in. The Marriott wants that driveway to come straight in for their public safety, for the Marriott. That was one thing that Massimo extended to me. As far as Patsy, I got an impeccable moral compass. I can assure you that whatever I'm telling you is factual. I would be more than happy to supply you with Massimo's phone number. He's the general manager at the Marriott Grand Ocean. If you would like to verify that that's factual, I'd be more than happy to do that. The other reason why there's such a rush for me to get this permit, I didn't want to share this with anybody earlier. My client will probably be legally completely blind by the time this house is done. He's got a degenerative eye disease that came on 8 months ago, and I'm just trying to get this house so he can at least visually see a haze or a shadow.
Okay.
If you need his medical records, I can get his medical records for you.
That's, I think that's really irrelevant to the merits of the case.
Right.
Thank you, though, for showing that. Okay. So again, we have, yes, Ms. Bryson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. First of all, I don't doubt at all the credibility of Mr. Liker. Never doubt that. It was merely a legal question about what the board can and cannot do. So no personal, nothing personal about it, simply a legal question. And with that, I would move to deny this variance based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law as set forth by the staff provided in their testimony before this board, except for criteria number 4, I would change that to read, and Ms. Haley, I'm using the staff language, so I hope I'm going to be helpful to you. In criteria number 4, it would say the authorization of the variance will be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or the public good, and the character of the zoning district where the property is located will be harmed by the granting of the variance. So thus changing from will not to will in both places. Under the findings of fact, add the following third finding of fact. The variance would be contrary to the requirements of the Forest Beach Neighborhood Character Overlay District. And in addition, the following finding of fact, the provisions of the LMO as found in subsection 16-2-103, 5, sorry, it is 4C, provides that the fact that the property may be utilized more profitably should a variance be granted may not be considered as grounds for a variance. So my motion is to deny with those changes to the staff proposed findings and conclusions.
We have a motion before the board to deny the variance. Do we have a second? I hear no second. Therefore, the motion does not move forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
I did see Miss Loudermilk trying to speak.
Okay.
I'm not sure if she's able to get through.
Okay.
If we,
No. Regarding the motion, I've got no comment, no input.
okay,
Thank you.
Sure.
So last chance, is there a second to Ms. Bryson's motion? Hearing none, I think the motion dies. Does anyone else care to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, Walzak.
Yes.
Is it possible to make a motion to, again, we can, any variance that we grant can have conditions. Could, for example, could one of the conditions be, we'll give them a variance to put dirt on the property? I mean, I'm just, to get them started. Would that be okay? I don't know. I'm asking. Or I'm asking the lawyers, whoever.
I think that question would have to be directed to staff, Mr. Walzak.
Okay. Are you there, staff?
Nicole Dixon. I mean, we'd have to check with the building division to find out if they would allow fill to be placed on the site without a permit. I mean, I don't think it's in accordance with our code.
No, but Nicole, I understand that, but when you think about it, someone owns a piece of property. If they want to plant a tree on it, or whatever they want to do on it, doesn't necessarily require a permit, or put a bush on it, or even put a portus, Johnny on the spot on there. Does that require a permit? Some of these things, I think,
You don't need a permit to plant a tree, no, but there's certain things that you do need a permit for, and the placing of fill on a site is considered development, and you do need a permit in order to do that.
Well, where I kind of disagree with that, Nicole, is that it's not part of the permanent feature of the development. It's there temporary only. So it's going to be removed. So therefore, I can see if you're going to build something permanent, that would apply. I just don't see it in this case where you're putting something temporary. It's going to be gone.
Okay. I mean, the fill that's being placed on the site is to, I believe, build foundation, and I'm not a builder or contractor. I don't know, Mr. Liker, can you explain that process a little bit more? But my understanding of fill is you're placing on the site to build it up and even it out and then grade it. Am I being wrong here?
Well, that's correct too. I mean, the bigger piece of this is they're going to be going for a loan for $1.4 million to build this house. So there's a lot attached with having a building permit for that particular plan. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just placing dirt. There's putting everything out to bid, which is going to take a month or two. Getting materials and contractor pricing. Everything's going to be different now. Obviously, building materials have gone up substantially in the last 4 months. So I'd like to bid this job one last time and not have to keep rebidding. So that would be my only concern.
Mr. Liker, again, Charlie Walzak here. But isn't it true that the purpose of the dirt is to surcharge the subsoil?
It is the surcharge. That's correct.
And then it gets removed because then the subsoil is compact and you can start building.
No, in this particular case, they have a high spot on the land and they're pushing in to fill the low spot. So they're not importing. If they're importing, it's a very small amount of material. They're basically just shifting the material around to fill the low spot and to cut down the high spots.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
may I?
Teresa, before you go, Bob Johnson, could you mute your microphone, please? Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Teresa. Oh, I'm sorry. It was Anna.
Yeah, that's okay. It's the joys of online meeting.
Right.
I think that we have to start discussing the whether or not here, right?
Yes.
I think that we have some reservations. Each of us has reservations. I think we need to simply talk that out rather than trying to figure out some condition by which dirt might be put on the property without a building permit and all of those things. I don't believe that we're going to be able to change how this gentleman and this couple will be granted their building permit, right? I just think that's beyond our scope.
I agree.
But what we are here to do is to decide whether or not we are comfortable granting this variance, and I think we all have some reservations about it. And you know, I don't take it lightly. I don't take the process of granting a variance lightly. I believe that we need to feel that we are doing so for very strong reasons. I also believe that as human beings, we are, and on the basis of the facts as presented by Mr. Liker and others, that there is hardship being inflicted on, I think their names are the Sabos.
Yes.
And on Mr. Liker himself in his work and his business. But I think we're just going to have to talk this out. We can try to push it forward and push it forward and push it forward, but we need to just go ahead and talk this out to see whether or not we can get comfortable granting this variance or get comfortable with simply saying no. And that's just what we have to do. And you know, I think my hesitation is, you know, I bet I'm not alone in this, that to be honest, I kind of feel like this is the Marriott's sort of dilemma to correct. Whether or not they can do so within a reasonable time frame is completely out of our hands also. But, you know, I do have a concern about, you know, granting the variance and then, you know, if and when the Marriott comes through, you know, it doesn't matter. We won't, you know, the issue goes away. But in some ways, that's slightly troubling because we've set a precedent for doing so. At least it could be argued that we have. And I have to say, I wonder whether granting the variance sort of makes the urgency for negotiating with the Marriott go away a little bit, right? How urgent is it going to be to really negotiate with the Marriott and to push and push and push and push and push for at least something in writing? I'm a little bit concerned that whomever was spoken to at the Marriott could not even send an email for us to say, this is under consideration, give us another bit of time. That does concern me. It concerns me that had I been on that phone call, I know I would have asked for such, to say, listen, I've got to face the town on Monday. Can you give me something? It concerns me that we don't have something. And so I am hesitant, but I think we simply have to talk this out, and either we get comfortable or we don't.
Okay, thank you for those excellent comments. Mr. Liker, you seem to want to respond to that a bit.
I did. So, I mean, part of the hardship here is, going back to historic Hilton Head and things of that nature. I believe Alder Lane is a very old road on the island. So how did that ever get sold off to the Marriott? I mean, that lot had continuous access the whole entire front of that property until the Marriott went in. So keep in mind, Alder Lane used to be a road that accessed the houses on Alder Lane. That road was sold out or given to. I used to work a lot on highway and roads up in Vermont with mud sit and everything else. It's very difficult for a road to disappear. So the only person that gained out of that road disappearing would have been the Marriott Grand Ocean. I mean, it's very hard to sell a road. So that's part of the hardship there. That's a big hardship.
Okay, thank you. Let me, taking Dr. Ponder's comments about we need to decide something here, I pulled out the staff report from last time, and criteria 1 was the summary of facts and conclusion of law that led staff to recommend denial. That there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. And the report contended that the subject has had this concrete wall owned by the Marriott, that the property was previously developed with a single-family home that was demolished in 2009, which had driveway access to Alder Lane. So that one condition number 1, extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the property, is what led staff to recommend denial. So I want to ask staff, I guess, Missy, this would be addressed to you. If the variance request were denied, how would the construction of this house or the driveway access proceed?
I'd like to back up just a minute. So in the staff report, criteria 1, 2, and 4, staff recommended that those criteria were met. It was criteria 3 that was not met. So staff does agree that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to this piece of property.
You are correct. I apologize. I grabbed the wrong one.
Okay. There certainly are not very many properties with these circumstances.
I think Mr. Chairman, this is Anna Ponder again.
Yes.
I think the issue here, because I was actually sitting looking at the staff's very thorough report. With criteria 3, I think this is where, you we need to determine whether or not we feel there's extraordinary hardship here, because, you know, the architect made a mistake, or all of these things that are, you know, terrible.
A cascade of events.
It's a cascade of very unfortunate events, like the children's book. But I'm not sure that this series of unfortunate events merits our granting of a variance, right? I mean, it is one of those things where you say, gosh, you know, this is horrible that this happened to you, but this is fixable in other ways. I'm just, that's where we have to begin to sort of talk this out. It is really unfortunate, and I don't feel wonderful about, you know, piling on to anyone's misfortune. But I am questioning whether, you know, my architect made a mistake, or this or that. Whether that means that we say, yeah, okay.
Okay.
I don't know.
Mr. Chairman?
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Wait. I think Mr. Walzak.
Yeah, I just have another question for Mr. Liker. Have you actually told or spoken to Marriott to say, look, I'll close up the existing opening and I'll make the opening in the new wall, no charge to you, I'm going to do it?
They want to control the contractor on their property. So they want to do the bidding on the property to remove the wall. They want to have control over that. They don't want me to hire a contractor to remove the wall on their property.
And then I believe the testimony was that they would expect to be reimbursed by the
SABO. That's correct.
Okay. Does that get you, Charlie?
Yeah, so in other words, the owners are going to pay for the relocation or the opening of the wall, and they're going to take care of that. Right?
That's correct. That's the legal stuff. That's the legal papers getting drawn up, and they're going to be going back and forth from the Marriott to the owner. I would expect to have that resolved within 2 or 3 months, to be honest with you. I mean, then, you know, you're dealing with the Marriott. They've been pretty quick, actually, on coming back to me and giving me the approval to go through the wall. So I would imagine it's just the legal documents, another tweaking of the legal documents, and then it's a done process.
Thank you. I was trying to get us to an understanding of the implications of both approval and denial. And Missy, could you call up the drawing you had earlier of the site? Ms. Bryson, I'll get to you in just a moment.
Okay.
Okay. Oops, wait, we had it, now we lost it. There we go. Here's my question. Let's look at the implications on the site of both approval and denial. If the variance request as written, as submitted, were approved, then a building permit could be issued. Mr. Liker could begin his site work, and unless Marriott came through with approval later, the driveway would be constructed as is shown here, and the encroachment would be as highlighted in yellow. So that appears to me to be the implications of approval. If Marriott agreed to take down the wall later, that in fact occurs, then the access to the house would be straight in, and the need for the variance that had been granted would be obviated, and so there would simply be a straight-in driveway. Is that correct, Ms. Louie?
That's correct.
Uh,
The configuration of the driveway, as shown on this plan, is related to the variance, and they currently do have access through that open curb cut, which is where they're proposing the driveway currently.
Okay. If the variance were denied, how is access gained to the property through a driveway?
They still have the ability to have a driveway. They can utilize that existing driveway that's shown on the plan. Where they can't have any of the driveway running parallel within the buffer. So anywhere where the driveway turns by 90 degrees and starts going parallel outside of the red dashed lines is not allowed. And then because they have some driveway width that is added to their 14-foot widths within the buffer, they exceed that 24-foot of driveway within the buffer. They can't exceed that portion. So if they were to eliminate all of that yellow area on the plan, and still meet the requirements of driveway width that we have within the code, then they could proceed with, if they amended that. They would have difficult maneuvering.
Okay. Thank you. Now I believe Ms. Bryson wanted to speak.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Dr. Ponder, for your comments and helping us talk out some of our thoughts. I tried to test the waters and see what our inclination was towards denying it based on the staff's recommendation, and then I thought perhaps someone would counter with something to approve it, but I think we all have concerns about this, and I think Dr. Ponder very eloquently stated some of our concerns. Variances are not to be taken lightly. We must have very serious consideration about granting them, and especially I would urge in the case of an overlay district, which adds additional requirements. And so before we would vary those requirements, it even heightens our sensibility to granting a variance. What I want to ask, and believe me, the last thing I want to do is to prolong this. And I certainly don't want to add to the board's work in October. But what I might ask the staff attorney is, if we do postpone this again, so we don't make a final decision one way or the other, but ask staff to see if there's something that the applicant can produce from the Marriott in writing, not the final documents, but in writing, to say that the Marriott will approve the relocation of this wall and the curb cut access so that a building permit could proceed. Would the staff be willing to do that, so that, as Dr. Ponder suggested, if we do grant a variance, then it would take the pedal off the metal, so to speak, as far as getting approval from the Marriott. It still leaves some urgency to getting that done, but allows a path forward that does not rely upon this board making a decision as to whether or not to grant a variance today. So I just wondered if that might be a way to try to resolve this.
So Ms. Bryson, your question is, if there were some affirmative statement from Marriott that they were proceeding toward approving and removing the wall, is that enough for the town to grant a building permit? Is that your question?
Well, I think it would be a little bit more affirmative, and that is that the Marriott will approve of it subject to the documents being finalized. So not inclining to move towards it, but that they are approving it subject to the documents being finalized, similar to what you'd have with a settlement agreement. And you have to work out the final details. You might settle the matter and express some general terms of the settlement, but you have to wait for it to be reduced to writing before the parties finally agree. So something like that.
So your question is, if that were in place, is that enough your question is directed to staff, and it is, if that were in place, is that enough to grant a building permit without any action by the BZA?
That's correct.
And I'll leave
I
it.
guess, can you repeat your question for staff?
I will try. Since there are a couple of options here, one is for the plans to move forward as drawn. One is for this board to grant a variance. The other is for the Marriott to approve the relocation of the wall so that the access could be as the plans are shown. So for the latter, would the town be willing to consider a written document from the Marriott, not the final legal document agreeing to taking down the wall and moving it, but an affirmative statement from the Marriott that it will be done subject to the final document being drafted and signed? Would that be adequate for the town to proceed with granting a permit subject to the final documents being approved and signed?
This is
With
Stephen
that,
Ryan. May I speak?
go ahead, Mr. Ryan.
I probably don't have a good answer for that, but the response is probably likely to be that it would depend. It would depend on what we get provided from the Marriott and whether or not what we're getting into is a little bit more of internal procedural issues as opposed to LMO or other statutory guidelines on how the permitting process works in the town of Hilton Head, and whether or not he would have to submit updated plans that would reflect the driveway coming through where it's going to be once that wall comes down. He may need to have to update the plans as well, but it's we would kind of have to look at what we got and then make a decision there. If staff has anything else they want to add, that'd be great too. I have nothing further.
Well, it seems to me that from the Marriott, there are two things. One is an affirmative statement that it will take down that portion of the wall to provide direct access into the property. So the first thing is an affirmative binding statement by Marriott that they will do that, I guess subject to final pricing and so forth. And then the second thing is negotiation and our decision between the Marriott and the property owner over what that's going to cost and who pays for it. So maybe there are two different things, maybe they're the same, I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman, Nicole Dixon. So my understanding is if the Marriott gives permission for the wall to come down, their access would go from Alder Lane directly through the property as shown on your screen in the yellow highlighted area. So the pink driveway that's shown up there, that access would go away, and their direct access from Alder Lane would be through that yellow highlighted area. No variance is needed to do that. So if the Marriott grants permission for that wall, the variance goes away. If the Marriott doesn't grant the permission for the wall, that's where the variance request comes in, and that's what I believe is the request that y'all need to decide on whether or not it meets the 4 criteria for a variance.
Okay, I see Mr. Johnson with his hand up.
This is a question for the staff, Mr. Chairman. If the driveway that enters this property that they're showing now was 10 feet wide, hypothetically, and they allowed in the middle of that yellow space a 14-foot, for lack of a better term, turnaround area, we wouldn't be here, would we?
Can you repeat that? I'm confused by what you're asking.
Okay, you said they're allowed 24 feet. Is that correct?
Yes. Correct.
Okay, So the driveway could be as slender as 10 feet as it enters the site, correct? If they change that 14 feet to 10 feet, hypothetically.
To do a one-way in, are you asking?
Yes, well, I mean, yeah, one lane in, a 10-foot driveway over the property line. And they took that yellow space and made it 14 feet wide. We wouldn't have this issue, would we?
If the total width was 24 feet, you mean?
Correct.
Say the yellow area was 10 feet and the driveway was still 14.
No, I'm saying the driveway's 10 and the backup area is 14. We wouldn't be here. And they changed the radius of that entry drive so it doesn't, it's all about coming over the property line, is it not?
It's about the area within the buffer, yes. It's about how much driveway width is within the buffer, as well as the driveway that runs parallel in the buffer. So as soon as it makes that 90-degree bend, it cannot do that for the code.
Right. So that really should be highlighted. Yellow.
I have another question.
Let's let Mr. Johnson finish.
Okay.
I'm just thinking there's a way to work this out where he can get a permit if the drawings are modified and there's still ability, although it might be difficult, to back up and get out. And I don't know why the driveway has to be 14 feet wide and looks like it's even wider when it crosses the property line. And the radius can be changed so it's not as much in the buffer zone as it is now. It must be 20 feet across there.
14 feet wide, I believe, is the minimum for a fire apparatus to be able to enter the site. Staff did try to work with the applicant when the application first came in and question why they couldn't move the house back so that it was up against their setback line, because there is room for the house to be shifted back, and then that would reduce the encroachment in the front. And again, the house can be redesigned or moved around so that there is no encroachment. And that's what staff struggles with, is the lot is not unusable. They do have access. The house can be redesigned so that it's meeting all LMO requirements. And so that's where staff struggled with criteria 3. Because, there are extraordinary conditions that, this wall that runs along the front of their property does not exist in many other areas, like we mentioned, maybe 1 or 2 other lots. So there are extraordinary conditions that pertain to the property, but at the same time, the applicant could redesign the house or move it a little bit so that it's meeting all LMO requirements. So the lot's not unusable.
They can also redesign the driveway.
Correct.
And with this Alder Lane being as close as it is to this house, you think a fire truck has to get into that area?
I don't know. I can't
never heard of
that.
such a thing.
I mean, Alder Lane is a drive aisle within Marriott.
Right.
So I can't answer for fire rescue what they directly need access for, but I do know that, typically drive aisles need to be, or driveways should be 20 feet. An access easement should be 20 feet wide to be able to accommodate fire apparatus. So I think 14 foot wide is basically your minimum for a driveway.
Yeah, I would challenge that. After doing 500 homes on Hilton Head, I've never had a driveway that's wider than 12 feet. Especially when there's access right directly. I think they need to redesign the driveway, and they need to check the codes as far as why the fire truck has to get into this property. Fire companies especially don't like their fire engines to catch on fire. They don't park that close to a house. Anyway.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a fire truck. It could be ambulance, or, we
Right.
just want to make sure that there's adequate space if needed.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lisa Laudermilk.
Just a moment. Are you done, Bob, Mr. Johnson?
Well, off the record, I'd just like to say I think that's a misinterpretation of the code, and that this driveway can be redesigned so they can get back to 24 feet and they can go forward.
Let me ask.
And then when they get their approval, they can come back to the town and request a modification to the driveway.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Liker. Could you tell us why the house itself cannot be shifted to the left to the edge of the property line? And could you comment on Mr. Johnson's idea of redesigning the driveway?
My understanding is if I push that over to the property line to the left, you've got that setback angle. Once you hit a certain height, you've got to come in that degree, that 35 degree or whatever the requirement is. That's where that falls in.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's a setback angle.
So what we understand then is moving the house to the left really isn't an option.
Correct.
Okay, then could you address the idea of redesigning the driveway?
I mean, they're entertaining everything. So the last time we had a meeting, I remember discussing the fact of doing a conditional variance. I needed more time to work with the Marriott to get a response. Had I had a no from the Marriott, you guys would be more inclined to look at the variance a little bit different. I'm telling you that I've had the conversation with the Marriott. The Marriott, it's in their best interest. They actually extended that. It's in their best interest to have that driveway come straight in.
You've made that point before with Marriott. My question is the feasibility of redesigning the driveway as Mr. Johnson has suggested.
Yes, I mean, we'd be more than willing to do that.
Okay.
That's an easy fix.
All right, thank you. Now, Mr. Walzak, I haven't forgotten about you, but we're still on Mr. Johnson's comments, and I think Ms. Loudermilk wanted to speak to those. So, Lisa, you
I'm
have
finished, Mr. Chairman.
Well, yeah, I think we're getting to the issues, I think that are, I mean, specific to the question here as far as the utilization of the property. And I feel a little frustrated that maybe we are not hearing from or having input from the architect, because clearly the placement and design of the house is key to the issue here. You know, I too take variances very seriously. I don't prefer to defer action again. However, I would like to be convinced that the utilization of the property, that there is absolutely no other option for placement of the house or maybe elevation of the house, that the garage could not be a straight-in shot from the existing wall cut. I mean, those are things we can't answer. But I mean, that is the key. There's no question this wall issue and the fact it's controlled by the Marriott, who really, you know, is being accommodating. They have no benefit to agreeing to move a wall. But I think all those issues do impact utilization of the property. Now, do they unreasonably restrict it? You know, I don't feel like I can really answer that question. And I feel like the architect is the person best to answer that question. Again, Mr. Liker, if you can jump in there and shed any more light, again, as to the placement of the house.
I mean, my understanding was the architect had worked with the town, I believe Ann Horseman, And that was the second rendition. And according, he shows the driveway coming straight in through the wall. I have no idea why he has that on there. I can't speak for him pertaining to that. So that threw me into a position of asking for a variance to get the house moving forwards once they called and said you cannot do that, to working with the Marriott in conjunction to try to get that portion resolved. So I'm just trying to cover both bases in case the Marriott came back to me and said it's a definite no, we don't want you touching the wall. They're the ones that came to me and said we're going to, they made their decision. They phone called me 3 weeks ago and said we're going to allow you to do that. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously are doing an admirable job about advocating here for
Right.
the homeowners.
Right.
But I keep saying, but after the obvious reluctance of, and I will say collectively, the town, the staff, our struggle
Right.
with the issue, has anyone gone back to the architect again and
I
said,
have.
this is an issue?
I have. And he's basically washing his hands from it. So obviously he's someone I'm not going to work with in the future. I mean, I didn't bring the owner to the architect. I met the owner and they already established a relationship with the architect.
Mm-hmm.
But I know through this process, that's an architect I will not be using on a project.
It's unfortunate, I guess, for the homeowners.
It
But,
is.
yeah.
I think it's unfortunate for everybody, and I'm just trying to advocate for them since they're not local to try to facilitate getting some movement on getting a building permit. That's all.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay. No, thank you.
I'd be happy even if you put a conditional that they do not get a CO unless their driveway comes straight into the Marriott. It's going to happen.
I think it would be irresponsible of us to allow a project to go forward if our bottom line intention would be to deny it, assuming, in the odd event the Marriott does not cooperate.
Right, and we discussed that last time, that we would do a conditional. And then, the worst case scenarios they're going to say no. Well, since then they've said that, yes, we can remove that portion of the wall.
Well, Mr. Liker,
Oh,
hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. We as the board talk about a lot of stuff, but it only boils down to what's important is when we decide, and no decision's been made yet. So, Mr. Walzak, you had, let me back up. Ms. Loudermilk, are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walzak, you had indicated you want to speak, and then I believe Ms. Ponder is next.
Yes, just a couple of quick questions. What is the actual preferred entrance by the owner?
The preferred entry is through the wall, and that's the preference of the Marriott for safety reasons.
Straight in.
Correct.
Has anyone sketched that out so we could see what that would look like?
It's on the plans that are submitted to the town right now. The highlighted stuff is for the variance, but if you look at the plans, it has it shown.
I don't know if we've seen that, have we?
Well, Mr. Walzak, I believe the testimony earlier was that plans were submitted to the town for approval that had a straight-in driveway without taking into consideration that the wall blocked the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
Okay.
Are you done?
It would be nice to see it, but I don't remember seeing it, Okay.
No, we haven't seen it. And Dr. Ponder, you had wanted to speak.
Yeah, I think at this point we're way in the weeds, and that we need to come out of the weeds and make a decision. We cannot reconstruct this house for these lovely people who have had this series of unfortunate events. We have one of two actions that we can take here. We can approve or we can disapprove. We can do so conditionally or blah, 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 all of that. But I think, to be honest, we keep coming back to the idea that the optimal solution here is for the Marriott to say, move forward. The unfortunate part about that is that optimal solution comes with a timeline on it that is indeterminate and that puts some stress on Mr. Leiker. We all agree. That, again, is an unfortunate situation, but I don't think that's a situation for us to really deal with. I think that our job here is to look at this, look at what the materials that have been presented to us, to look at this plan, but for us to, I would have hoped that in this month that we stretch this out, that Mr. Leiker might have been able to use that as leverage to get further along with the Marriott or with the architect or with whomever, but that hasn't happened. Now, either we're going to hope that happens and stretch this out, or we're going to come to the conclusion that, because we keep coming back to the Marriott, which would make the variance a moot point, which means we're really not inclined to give the variance. Because that's what we keep coming back to. Or it would seem that way. But I think we've got to get to making a decision here rather than just talking this out forever.
Okay. Are you wanting to make a motion, or are you ready to do that?
May
Yes.
I comment on that?
Just
Okay,
a
so
No, Mr. Leiker, please, just a second. Dr. Ponder, I asked, did you want to make a motion, or you were just making comment?
I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Johnson first, and then I would be willing to make a motion, I think.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Is it fitting to ask if Ms. Bryson might reintroduce her motion?
Well, it would be. I think we may have a cleaner, simpler motion if we hold on a minute.
Okay, that's fine.
And I think I owe Mr. Leiker a chance to respond first. Mr. Leiker, did you want to speak?
I do. So, I'm not familiar with the history of Alder Lane, but I'd imagine that was a town-owned road or a private road. Who retained possession of that, the original road?
I don't know, and we're not sure it's relevant to our discussion.
Okay.
Dr. Ponder.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Zoning Appeals disapprove the application based on those findings of facts and conclusions of law found in the staff determination.
Thank you. Do we have a second to the motion? Mr. Johnson, I believe. Can you unmute and second the motion?
I second the motion.
Okay.
I second the motion.
All right. We have a motion and second before the floor to uphold the staff determination and deny the variance based on the findings and facts and conclusions of law stated in the staff report. Do we have any discussion here? Let me go down the. We'll start. Dr. Ponder, you made the motion, so I assume you don't have anything you want to add to it?
No, I do not.
Okay. Ms. Loudermilk?
I don't have anything to add or comment, no.
Okay, I believe Mr. White left the meeting.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we still have a quorum. Ms. Bryson, do you have a comment on the motion?
I will support the motion by adding what I did previously. I was trying to support our legal argument about denial.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walczak, any comment from you about?
No comment.
Okay, and Mr. Johnson?
No comment.
Hearing none, we have a motion before the board to deny the application for variance. Teresa, would you call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson?
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
In favor of the motion?
Mr. Katrier,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder.
For the motion.
By a vote of 6-0 with one member missing, the motion to deny quarries. That concludes the hearing on this particular variance. Thank you all for your time. We've been at it for quite a while. If I could ask the board's indulgence, I'd like to move on the agenda. Let me find where I am. Or does the board feel the need for a short break?
Mr.
No.
Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, I have a commitment I cannot get out of, and I have to go.
Okay.
So I apologize to everyone for having to leave early. It won't be a
Thank you.
habit.
Okay, I know. Thank you.
It's okay.
Mr. Walzak, you were making a comment?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, all right. Bear with me a moment. So we have new business. We have amended the agenda to consider the issues relating to the October meeting. As I said to you earlier, we have two cases, a Marshland Road variance and a appeal from the Island Club currently on the agenda, plus a number of Sandcastle Court issues that are all similar, but each one is individual. Staff has indicated we could move the meeting time for the October 26th meeting from 2:30 to 1:30, and we have a window with the Blue Jeans availability. So I would like to ask if we could have a motion to advance the meeting time for the October 26th meeting to 1:30.
So moved.
Ms. Bryson moved, Mr. Walzak seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Okay, yeah, that seems to carry. And then the two, I have no idea how long the two items will take, although Marshland Road issues seem to take a long time. And these Blue Jeans meetings are inefficient in terms of our time, that just by their very nature, although we work as hard as we can at them. I'd like to discuss whether there is a sentiment to schedule the consideration of the Sandcastle Court hearings on either October 29 or October 30. I'd like to propose the 29th. Any discussion from the board about that? Mr. Walzak?
Agreed. No, I agree.
But you muted yourself, Charlie.
I agree that Thursday would be better. And why don't we see if we can take everything and whatever, falls over, we just, in other words, let's limit ourselves to a reasonable amount of time. Like 5 o'clock.
Okay, Mr. Johnson? Yeah, Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Chairman, does that mean we cannot look at it on the scheduled day if we
The
have time?
26th?
I think we need to be clear on that.
My thought would be to have the Sandcastle Court on Thursday completely and not try to address them on that Monday.
Okay, so that's clear. We wouldn't take it up if we had time. That's fine. I just wanted to be clear on it.
Okay, I'm just concerned that particularly the Marshland Road case may take quite a while, given the applicant.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Bryson.
Yes, sir. I could do it on the 29th, but I have a previous commitment and I wouldn't be able to start it until 1 o'clock. But I could go. And Mr. Walzak, I agree. Let's set a maximum time, maybe 5 o'clock. But if we could push it to 1 o'clock that day, then I would be available.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Patsy. Teresa, 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th is available.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to hear the Sandcastle Court variance request at a 1 o'clock meeting, special meeting on Thursday, October 29th.
So moved.
Motion by Bryson, second by Walzak. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that's set. We have a waiver report from Missy Lewick that had no waivers, I believe. Anything else to come before the board at this time, Ms. Bryson? Up?
Yes, sir. I'd ask about the status report on our request. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Teresa, let's put the status report on the LMO amendments on the October 26th meeting.
Yes, sir, we can do that.
And if we don't get to that, then we'll move it to the 29th. We can always. Anything else to come?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nicole Dixon.
Yes, ma'am.
The only status report is that staff is reviewing those waivers, and if we find that that amendments are warranted based on that review, then it will be included in the 2020 LMO amendment list.
Okay. That's what you need to tell us then on the 26th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else to come before the board? Hearing none, I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you for your time.